And you're keeping an eye on the comments.
I am indeed, Richard. Good morning, gentlemen. Or good evening, everybody else. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. And good morning, Patrick.
No,
What do
Martin
you
hasn't
prefer,
gone on a
Pat?
shock diet. This is our new friend, Pat.
How are we, everyone? Good morning and good evening, wherever you are around the world.
Hello. So we've got Pat on this morning or this evening in Sydney. Pat is the joint chief of the Sydney Supporters Club. And Pat is an Aussie. It's fair to say the Sydney Supporters Club is a really good mix of young and old, grizzled Mancunians who traipsed around Chesterfield, Wrexham and Wickham in the 90s. Some grizzled old Aussie fans who got those results by fax, and fair to say some newer fans in Sydney as well. So, Pat, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and what brought you to City?
Well, yeah, thanks. Thanks for a nice intro, Rich. My name's Patrick Holly, 36 years old. Born and bred in Australia, originally come from a big old steel city just north of Sydney called Newcastle. Moved to Sydney when I was quite young, and I've been living in this area ever since. Spent 2 years living in New York, working at a summer camp, then getting a job actually working on a bunch of golf courses back in 2004 and 2005. So it was around about that time that's when I really started getting into following Manchester City. But the first time I ever watched them, that were ever really got any sort of influence, was actually on the 9th of November 2002. I'm sure all of you remember that well as the last ever derby at Main Road. I was watching the match with a couple of mates who I used to play cricket with at the time. Their dad was originally from northern Manchester, up around Middleton way. And I remember the match being on at about 11:30 at night. You know, as Rich, we've alluded to so many times, that's normally like our disco kickoff. You know, the time that is the best chance to get everybody out and have a few beers and have a bit of fun and watch City play. And I just remember watching that game, and you know, this is back in the days where the TVs were this wide, but then they were that wide at the back. You know, the back of them were twice as wide. I remember listening, just hearing the sound of the crowd at Main Road, just the speakers being all distorted from the noise and everything. And I remember when Anelka scored that first goal, it just got even more distorted. And I remember turning to my mate's dad and I said to him, when was the last time your lot won a trophy? And he says, it's coming on about 26 years now. And I said, your lot still celebrate the same way like you've just won a league title, or you're defending the league title from last season. And I said, that's the sort of team I can get behind. And it's sort of that's sort of where it kicked off from there. But it was really like when I moved overseas, and obviously more favourable kickoff times, not going to lie, that got me into watching City a little bit more. I remember I just settled into America the same week that we just beat Newcastle to effectively stay up the following season. And these are the sort of things that sort of stuck with me and sort of set me on my way to becoming a bit of an Aussie Bert, you might say. So, I, without warbling on too much, I really started getting into the idea of the supporters club because we originally did have an official supporters club back in the late 2000s into the 2010s. And they were run by a couple of expats who happened to actually just sort of pack up and move back to the UK around about the same time. All together, and I sort of just ran it as a bit of a social club. You know, just kept in touch with everybody over social media. You know, just had a certain little social club, and then of course ran into who's now one of my great friends, Tanya Davis. Met her actually at the 2016 League Cup final where we beat Liverpool, and we just became really, really good friends pretty much overnight. We basically arranged that I would come and pick her up before every match. We'd go watch all the matches together at our local bar at Cheers. For those of you that want to know, it's 561 George Street. If anybody's in Sydney and wants to ever meet up with us. And then from there, it just within about a year of just seeing matches together, she just came up with the idea and said, do you want to get the official supporters club up and running again? I said, yep, I'm all for that. And then we went back to official status. I think it was late 2017. And since then, we've been going steady. We've been having at least 100. Well, pre-COVID, we're having between 100 and 120 members a year. Still getting quite a good number of those heading over to Manchester every year, going to see matches, you know, creating experiences and just bringing back bringing back their experiences from the match and just helping people out who want to make that choice, make that pilgrimage over to Eastlands and watch the Blues play.
Yeah, yes, and so I must admit I'm a bit of a Glory fan when it comes to going to cheers. I go for cup finals and league title games, and I think
and trophy events.
Yeah, I have been to a couple of early morning Champions League games when it is rather quieter, and not so many. I think last time I was there, Tanya was actually almost having a sleep on the one of the upstairs lounges.
Right, Richard and Pat. There's an elephant in the room. How the hell do you watch Manchester City when you live in Australia?
It's a good question. Sorry, you go, Rich.
I think it's an addiction, isn't it, Rob? Having grown up in Manchester and been a City fan all those years, one thing that was critical when I moved to Australia was going to be able to watch City, and so you get all the packages that you need. I mean, it used to just be Foxtel. Now you have to have about 5 different packages just to watch City. And the one thing you will say down here is every game's live, so there's no embargo on 3:00 Saturday games, etc. So unless you've got a League Cup game against a absolute minnow, every single game that City play is on TV. Every Champions League game is live, every Premier League game is live, and most FA Cup games involving top teams are live. So we do get to see them all. I think the challenges, which I'll ask Pat about, is that the games are the best game you'll get all season is a 9:30 kickoff when the time difference is 9 hours, and you have a 12:30 lunchtime game. We get a 9:30 p.m. game. So there'll be a couple of those a year. And then probably the next best is when you get the 11:30 games at the moment. Chelsea coming up on Saturday is an 11:30 p.m. game. And then you get the Champions League games, which will be usually 7 a.m., which isn't too bad as long as you keep your calendar blocked out for work first thing. But we then have a lot of games.
Rich, that's totally fine. That's totally fine, mate. But you've got a connection with Manchester. But how come you're not just a rabid Scouse fanboy like everyone else?
Well,
not you.
Patrick.
You've been to Manchester, Patrick. Why are you not just a rabid Scouse fanboy or a cult member? Why are you not lighting candles? Why are you not wearing rags? Or why are you not supporting the History Boy Club of Arsenal or Nottingham? Did you know Nottingham Forest won at 2 Champions League finals? Did you know Aston Villa's won a Champions League? Why are you supporting Ickle Little City when you could be supporting a historic History Boys club? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I know, mate. That's not the only thing I ask what's wrong about myself. But look, it just comes back to that influence I had growing up. The last Main Road derby. Another thing that is a big influence as well, and I was thinking about last night. I was thinking about what I was going to say when I came on here, but I remember the first time I ever got exposed to the Mancunian way of life, the sense of humour and the positive outlook that a lot of people have on life. Is I don't know if you might remember this, but Sydney and Manchester have a bit of an affiliation going back to, I think it was as early as 1992. Because if you remember, your city almost won the rights to the 2000 Olympic Games. I believe we won it by, I think, about 3 or 4 votes ahead of Beijing, and then Manchester was only a vote behind them. So you had a very, very good opportunity there to win those Olympic Games. And I remember staying up because I think the announcement was made at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So even at that age, I was already getting used to getting up at 3 o'clock for things that are happening over in Manchester. And I remember they had a couple of people from the local network, Rich. I think it was Channel 9 or something. Were on, and they had people based it. They had a reporter on the ground in Manchester, and of course they had people on the ground at Sydney Harbour, and everybody's going mental because we just won the Olympic Games. And they were chatting to this. Well, the first one they did was they showed highlights of when the announcement was made that Sydney won the Olympics. And I remember they were panning across the crowd, and it looked like it was Piccadilly Gardens or something. And as And as they said, like the winner of Sydney, you could hear it off in the distance. There must have been a handful of Aussie expats in the crowd who started cheering. And as they're cheering, the camera keeps panning across, and you see a couple of monks just turn around and start giving the two finger, like a jovingly, like 2-finger salute to them. And then after that, they then go to this live interview where they're just chatting to this young fella from Manchester. And he's talking about, he's saying like, oh, look, I'm disappointed that we didn't get the Olympics. It would have been great. It would have really put Manchester on the map, or even more than what it is today. And he's like, I can't believe Sydney got it. And he says, what have they got that Manchester hasn't got? And then he just pauses for a second. He goes, oh, apart from the cracking weather. And of course, from there, it's just like, even as like a 7-year-old me, I just got a real kick out of that.
Yeah, and Patrick, you know that the weather was one of Manchester's selling points, because Sydney actually has more rain than Manchester in a year. And that was one of the things the Manchester bid tried to drum home. You don't want it going somewhere wet like Sydney. And then Sydney countered by saying, but Manchester's rain spread over about 310 days.
Yes.
Sydney's rain's only spread over about 120 or something. So I remember, being, thinking that maybe there was this tiny chance Manchester win. And I think I was in a Howard Johnson motel at JFK Airport when I got the bad news that Manchester hadn't got it. But yeah it was a disappointment. But I think certainly Manchester always felt plucky underdogs against Beijing and Sydney, given some of the politics around all that. Yeah,
but that's getting back to what you were saying, Rob, is basically it was just that understanding that sense of humor and that outlook on life that Mancunians have, that sort of didn't influence me into what I was doing, in obviously 10 years time, but it just meant that when I grew a bit older and I was a bit more aware of the ways of how the world worked and things like that, that I just felt this sense of comfort around people from Manchester. I felt how great a city it was. And at the time, it was like everybody in high school was a United fan. Every time we had a mufti day, somebody would be wearing like a Beckham shirt or a Skull shirt, or and actually my best mate was an Arsenal fan too. So he was he was all right. I don't mind him now. And if anything, he's actually.
You mean he wasn't constantly reminding you of how much history they've got because they've won some trophies?
Yeah.
No, we weren't. If anything,
always winning trophies. Always winning trophies.
Well, the thing was, at the time when I started following City, that was around the same time we had the 2002 FIFA World Cup in Korea, Japan. So obviously with the time zones, that meant all the matches were on at dinner time, watching some great football and that. And at the time, everybody in our football group was obsessed with African players. And of course, my best mate, obviously being an Arsenal fan, his favourite player was Kanu. In fact, Kanu was the reason he started following Arsenal. A few other guys were fans of the Senegal team because they had such a great run in that tournament. And my favourite player at the time was actually Marc-Vivien Foé. And obviously, what happened to him, which is, was just horrible in that. And it was amazing because even my mates, just jokingly sort of, playing in the playground, bullying, saying like, oh, why do you follow him? Like, he's Manchester City and all this. And it's just like, I've seen the guy play. Like, I've seen highlights of the guy play back in those days. And but it was all 56K dial-up modem, and it took 20 minutes to load a 5-minute video. But used to watch highlights. I just thought he was a great player, and it was so funny because within a year of that, obviously that terrible news or tragedy that happened to him, at the Confederations Cup and that, and everybody almost automatically overnight just became like an indirect City fan, just because out of sympathy almost in a way. But I certainly wouldn't be able to get that now if I was in the playground. But no,
you'd probably get arrested. That's a little bit of my story. If you're in the playground. But no, I think Rob probably lives this. One thing we do have in Australia is lots of Liverpool fans because of a certain Australian winger in the 80s for Liverpool. It does seem to me that nearly every Australian over about 45 does seem to support Liverpool on the back of Craig Johnson. So it certainly can become a bit painful. And 2 and a bit years ago, when we won the league against Brighton, we were actually kicked out of the Cheers Bar because the Cheers Bar in Sydney is the supporters club branch for Liverpool pub as well as for City. So that was a little annoying, but it was very pleasurable dancing in the Three Monkeys about 50 yards up the road, whilst hundreds of crying Scousers trudged up the road, having had their dreams shattered.
Pat, I've got a question here in the chat, Pat. And I know Ivra's got a certain outlook on life that doesn't include you, but I'm going to ask you the question because why not? So Ivor says, what's the difference at all between the history Glory Hunter fans that I go on about for the Arsenals, Nottingham Forest, United and all the rest of it, and the millions of contemporary day Glory Hunters who are now wearing City shirts? What's the difference? So I'm just asking you a straight question there because, well, I don't know, you're being asked it by a City fan who's been around since the black and white days, since we had a Velociraptor on the wing and a Triceratops in defence. Jurassic Park stuff.
Oh, straight off the top of my head, I'm not really too sure how to approach this, but if there's one, look, I've said this to Richard a million times before. I said, and we say this to any new City fan who wants to come along, wants to get involved with us too. And I hope for the sake of creating a fan base or any other person that supports any other team, in the Premier League, especially in this part of the world, is one thing you should always do as a fan is one, if you're going to get involved with a club, even if it was just from yesterday, is one, take a little time to learn about the history of the club, because the first thing you want to do is you need to learn where a club has come from before you know where you're going to go forward with it too. And the second thing of all is, of course, don't ever let anybody question your loyalty, whether that's fellow people from your fan base or people from other fan bases, and that too. Excuse me.
Can I just make I know, and you are answering a long question here, and this will take a lot. Let me propose something to you, right? So, I've been going to Main Road since the mid-80s. Rob Ward in the chat, mid-70s. Rich, early 80s. Ivor, 60s.
Wow.
And then we moved to the Etihad, and we saw 6 goals at home. And you saw 6 goals at home as well, because you were a City fan. And then the 2008 takeover happened, and a few years after that, the club are a lot less interested in me and Rob Ward than Ivor, and a lot more interested in you. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think that expansion is necessary. I think that inclusion is necessary. Why would you want to be an isolationist in a global game? It's my opinion, but they built things like the Tunnel Club. Now, Martin, who's the owner of this channel, his father had the same seat at Main Road for donkey's years, 50 years, and he had the same seat at the Etihad since 2003 when we moved there. And then when they built the Tunnel Club to incorporate some international fans, some newer fans, his dad got booted out of his seat. The club didn't even say to him, we're going to move you. The club didn't even make measures to accommodate him by putting him in a different seat in a similar area or anything like that. And then a couple of years ago, the 1894 mob, and I will call them a mob because I can't stand them, decided that loyalty to the club, and that's points earned through going to games over the years, away games, home games, all the rest of it, doesn't matter as much anymore. What does matter is, if you're 18 to 24, you can go to whatever fucking game you want to go to. Just kicking people like me out, kicking people like Ivor out, kicking people like Rob Ward out. Other accommodations. Whenever the club plans something, or decide to do something, or they want an opinion on something, like the kits, for example, never asked me once. But I know for fact that fans in Australia get consulted, fans in America get consulted, fans in India get consulted on their opinions of all this stuff. Add to that things like the Super League. That traditional fan base, now this was before your time, that traditional fan base that kept the club in business has been completely tapped out of pocket and sidelined, is an opinion that can be held by older fans. And personally, there you go, Ivor just said he's been to over 1,000 City games and he can't afford the Tunnel Club. Now, I think that's the angle that Ivor's coming at it from. So, I'm not saying you're a modern fan, and I'm certainly not saying you're a glory hunter, but you are a more modern fan, and perhaps you've got a more rounded view on the things I've just said, and you see the other side of the coin that I can't see because I'm not living in Australia and I'm not a global fan. Because, I mean, I use that umbrella term in a non-patronising way. That's just what you are. You're a City fan in a different country, so you're a global fan. So come at that if you want.
Yeah, look. Again, it's a bloody good question, and it deserves a good long-winded answer. But no, look, I get what you're saying, but again, it comes down to from a personal experience too, where it was. I think it was because obviously if I started following City at the age that I did, it was about 15, 16 years old. And then when obviously you found out, a year later that Main Road had packed up and then moved to the Etihad, there was an element of me that that said like, it was like, I wish I'd had a chance to go and experience that. And it festered even more as time went on when City became this global empire, this massive global fan base and things like that, where it's just like, I do enjoy doing going and watching City play as well too, but for me it was like the experience. It's the experiences that experience of going to Main Road and the stories that I've heard from you and I've heard from so many different people about for example like how much they used to pack people into the Kippax and obviously stories of like the Gene Kelly stand and and those sort of things and those away days to those clubs that we may only see once every 5 years when we draw them in the third round of an FA Cup. So it's learning from those experiences that I sympathise with the older sweats, with yourself and Ivor and other people like that as well too. But at the same time too, I do feel like what you just told me about other people who had tickets and then they get booted out because of the Tunnel Club and that too, where it just comes down to, I think the problem is just putting the wrong people in the wrong jobs. And if you haven't got those people in those jobs that have a soul and understand like where these people have come from, then they're just going to treat you like a number and just move you along. Like unfortunately, that's how most big businesses become these days. I'm not saying like, stiff shit, lap it up and, that sort of thing. But I'm just saying it's just like, in an element like that, people just brush it aside like it isn't a way of life, but it is a way of life. It's a way of life for people over there. It's a way of life for generations. And yeah, it is very, very disappointing that people happen to be treated like that, like no reward for your passion, basically. I do think that's a bit.
It's more than that. It's more than that now, because what's happened in the last couple of years is now when I first started going to City, I was going with some people who were in their 70s, and this was in the 80s. They'd been going since Main Road opened.
Wow.
They'd gone to Hyde Road before, and you looked up to them. They were the club. They lived and breathed the club. They were the club. And I'm not saying that newer fans should look up to me. I'm certainly not saying that. It's an individual experience for everybody. But I and Rich and other people come with a knowledge and an understanding and a history that should be respected. And it feels like it's not the new fans that don't respect it so much. It's the club. It's the club that doesn't seem to have respected it, because
and a lot of things.
There's no difference. There's no difference between me, a 40-year guy, and a 5-game guy in the club's mind. Other than actually, I'm a lower class citizen now because they're worth more money to the club than I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, Rob, it's interesting. We in some ways, older City fans have a perspective on football that few other supporters do have, in that our level of amateurishness in the 70s and 80s was way beyond most other clubs. I mean, I could walk across the road from my primary school into the local newsagents, and the local newsagents who would be there serving you in the local newsagents but Eddie Phillips and his wife. I'd go to City on the Saturday and who'd be serving me at the souvenir shop but Eddie Phillips and his wife, because they owned the entire souvenir franchise or whatever it was called for City, and we so we were in some ways incredibly, amateurish at what we were doing, and so probably more needed to change. And we've been round the lower leagues, and so we know some things needed to change, but clearly we've become very, very corporate, and everything is about, a streamlined global, marketing business running large elements of the club. And whilst they use history in some respects, they tend to use history since 2008. And we get a lot more about the history of Vincent Kompany or the history of David Silva than we do about the real long-term history of the club. And going on to Glory Fans, I absolutely get it. I spent most of the 80s and 90s, either arguing with Liverpool fans or United fans about how they were Glory fans. I left Manchester in my mid-teens and moved down south and was at school with, 60% United fans in the part of the country that was nowhere near Manchester. So I get that. And I see that today. My daughter, around a year ago at school, comes home and says in the middle of Sydney, there's 7 City fans in my year. And, ultimately, one of them did have a granddad who played for City. So, they had a real family connection. But 5 of them are kids who at the age of 7, 8, 9 have watched football on TV, seen Aguero, and decided they're going to become City fans. Now,
do you know what, Rich? Some of it for me is that I sometimes watch it when we're doing a pre-match or we're doing a review or something like that, and we're playing someone like Southampton the next week, or we're playing Wolves, and you see it in the chat where people will go, "Oh yeah, we're going to smack them 7-0," and that's fine. We probably will, but we have a different respect and a different understanding for City, and I think it's just because we know how badly things can go wrong. And I want the younger fans and the more modern fans and the Glory fans, or whatever you want to call them, I want them to embrace the fact that it's about more than just putting trophies in the cabinet. It's a culture. You have to. If anyone's ever come to me that wants to understand Manchester City or support Manchester City, I have never turned them away and said, sorry, you weren't there with me in the North Stand when we were getting smacked. I say to them, I said, right, okay, here's where you stand.